as a result of this public hearing and on the forms provided at the back of the room is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning, Building, and Licensing Services. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, committee members will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be opened to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. There is also a sign-in sheet for interested members of the public at the back of the room. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications unless otherwise noted. The public meeting is held to gather public opinion. Exemption to this rule is outlined in bylaw number 2006-75 to delegate various planning approvals to staff and to adopt certain procedures for the processing of planning applications. Subject to delegated authority, Council has authorized staff to use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting, comprehensive report to expedite the approval process, and we do have a combined public meeting comprehensive report for zoning bylaw amendment to 276284 Kingsdale Avenue. A decision will be made at the regular portion of the Planning Committee meeting tonight. Information gathered at public meetings is then referred back to Planning, Building, and Licensing Services staff for the preparation of a comprehensive report and recommendation to Planning Committee. This means that after the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When this review is completed, a report will be prepared making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve or to deny. This committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council, and City Council has the final say on the applications from the city's perspective. Following Council's decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act, and anyone with an interest in the matter may file an appeal. Interested persons are advised that if a person or a public body does not make oral submissions at the public meeting or make written submissions before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of Council to the Ontario Municipal Board unless, in the opinion of the Board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. And with that, I will open our first public meeting, and it's a zoning bylaw amendment application for 268 Victoria Street, and Mr. Keane will be making the introductory presentation.
Well, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Committee, members of Council and staff and the public. My name is Mike Keane, and I'm a land use planner with Foten Consultants. And I'm here this evening to present to you a zoning bylaw amendment for 268 Victoria. This property is located at the corner of Victoria and Earl Streets. The area is a stable neighborhood. It's a low-rise residential neighborhood, and it's in proximity to a number of things that I've listed on the screen, like Winston Churchill Public School, which is right next door. And you can see also notes relating to KCVI, Queens, Donald Gordon Center, a few parks in the area, just to give you an idea of where this is located in the city. 268, the house that exists today, is an existing 2.5-story dwelling, and it's in an area that has a mix of low and medium density residential housing in it. In older parts of the city, which is very common, is there's a high incidence of non-conforming residential dwellings in those areas. Just taking a walk around the street, the top picture shows the houses that are immediately adjacent to 268 Victoria, and you can see the commonality here: brick houses, 2.5 stories, fairly tall and narrow, and you can see as that compares as it goes down the street, with 250 being a 2.5-story semi-detached. Flipping to the other side of the road of Victoria, you can see the church and 2 single detached dwellings. Traveling further down Victoria Street, we have these newer, they're actually zoned as duplexes. On Earl Street, right across the street from 268, we have this large 3-story multi-unit dwelling, and then 2 single detached dwellings that are further down the block. And of course, Winston Churchill School, which abuts our site. So what the request before the committee tonight is to ultimately and at some point in time allow a severance to subdivide the rear yard from 268. And in doing so, it would allow a 2.5-story semi-detached dwelling on the severed lot. And they would be 2 units, 5 bedrooms each, 1 parking space per unit. And I'm going to come back to this slide later because it's a good one to kind of show some of the changes that we've made since receiving the input from the public. So just a little bit more about the application. These are some renderings that have been prepared by Schultz and Zabak Architect, showing the 2.5-story dwelling with the front porches and an upper balcony on the 2nd floor. Our current proposal shows parking on both sides of the new house. Just another rendering showing the house from another angle. You can see that the design prepared by the architects matches the side look of 268 Victoria. So when we turn to the official plan, we are looking at designations and intent, and this area is within a housing district which allows for minor infill, and the prevailing themes within the housing district are that infill must be compatible with the prevailing built form, and that's really why I spent a lot of time just showing you some of the adjacent houses to this site. And within the residential designation, another house is obviously a permitted use. And there is still a strong encouragement for intensification in our housing districts in the city. So looking more specifically at some of those policies, we're not proposing any changes to the official plan, but specifically when we look at medium density, these are some key policies for consideration tonight. And medium density is in numbers. It's simply mathematics to determine whether something is low, medium, or high. So as a result, the official plan has criteria, and this criteria includes context, things like walking distance to commercial uses, proximity to transit, walking distance to parkland, and that the built form has to be compatible with the existing built form. And I propose to you that the form of a duplex, of a semi-detached building, 2.5 stories, is a form that is compatible for this neighborhood. And looking at the zoning bylaw, this area is an A4 zoned area, which allows, in shorter version of what's listed on the screen, 1 and 2 family dwellings, 1 and 2 unit dwellings. And as is common with most zoning bylaws, we're dealing with bylaws that were developed in the 1970s in this area. And so there are a number of amendments required, both to the retained lot and to the severed lot. And these changes are some to recognize the existing built form and some to acknowledge the form that we are proposing. And the form that we are proposing and those numbers really all stem back to compatibility with the neighborhood. And before I speak to some of the changes, there are some changes that have kind of lightly highlighted on this zoning map, and one is you can see a hatched line. In our original proposal, the one that's before the city, we had intended to save the garage, and through comments from staff and some of the comments we received from the public, we think it would actually be wiser to remove the garage and to draw the line straight. So you'll essentially have 2 square lots. And I'll get into this more in a few minutes. So there were a large number of comments that were received from the public, and I have to say I'm actually very grateful to have had the responses ahead of time, It's more common that I learn what the concerns are the night of the meeting. So I've had the chance to speak with my client. I've had the chance to speak a little bit with staff, but only just briefly, to kind of address some of the matters that were raised. And so these are general themes from the comments that have been received to date. The first one being that there's too many reliefs being requested. And a test dealing with too many reliefs is really one of minor variance. When we're talking about a zoning bylaw amendment, relief has to be justified on a site-by-site basis. And most, if not all, properties in this neighborhood and most within the city would actually require similar reliefs. So we design a project, we look to the importance of things like, do we have enough parking? Do we have enough open space? And some of those parameters are what shape what the ultimate zoning will look like for the site. We've received comments that the development is too dense, that the lots are too small. And I kind of have a similar response to that answer as well. We're proposing a semi-detached house. One of our traits in our firm is that we ask our clients that every room that can be a bedroom to be shown as a bedroom. And that is to avoid people zoning. It really is to avoid saying you're going to sneak people in there later. So I ask my clients and through the architects that I work with that every room that can be a bedroom be shown by a bedroom. But we don't plan with people, we plan with actual form. And in this case, a semi-detached building, in my mind, is an appropriate form in this neighborhood. And there was questions related to why we don't have a rear yard on the retained lot. And this is just a zoning thing. On a corner lot, and some zones have rear yards and interior side yards. And in this area of the city, a corner lot has 2 interior side yards. So in this case, we don't have a rear yard provision that is being amended on the existing house. But through the removal of the garage, the existing house will actually have an improved outdoor landscaped area. One of the points that was raised, this was also raised by staff as well as the public, is that the retained lot, we were proposing to somewhat acknowledge the existing open space. There's a parking area and there's a garage. And the number came out to just under 25% when the new changes to the amenity provisions require 30%. So we've discussed this with staff, and we think that the best solution is to actually remove the garage, which is not actually being used as a garage, so it's not providing parking anyway. And that will allow for the restoration of that area to be a landscaped open space. And in doing so, in removing the garage, we gain more than the 5% to exceed 30% required open space. And there was also another point, and this is again kind of more focusing on what people perceive to be the tenants will be of this building, that there would be no bicycle parking and that there would be no garbage storage. And on the property right now, besides the garage, there's a shed. And in realigning the property lines and removing the garage, we can just save the shed on the new lot, and it can be used for bicycle storage and garbage storage to deal with those matters. One of the most challenging comments that we've received, and one that I'm sure we'll hear a fair bit about tonight, is an old laneway that travels between the school and 268 and to service the addresses that are noted, 250, 252, 256, and 260. And before we initiated this project, we had lawyers look into the rights of those right-of-ways, and the right-of-way does not exist. There is no legal right-of-way for these properties. But however, my client wants to be a good neighbor. And so I'm going to propose to you some changes to the plan before you that will help to allow that access to those rear yards to be maintained. So in summary, the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and with the official plan. It certainly achieves modest intensification in a form that is suitable in the neighborhood, and the specifics of the zoning bylaw would be there to recognize both the built form and to ensure neighborhood compatibility. And before I wrap up, I just want to quickly go back to the site plan to try to describe some of the comments that I'm speaking about. And I'll try to use my mouse if it shows up on the screen. So there's a jog in the lot because originally we had proposed to save the garage because we felt it was in character with the neighborhood. But in fact, there's barely any garages in this street. So we do think it does make sense to take the line straight through, which means the garage would be removed. This area ultimately is providing the backyard for the existing house. And there is a shed currently located here. And what our proposal is to help maintain this laneway to be open is that we would take the house and move it closer to the east, closer to 268, which would actually allow us to park our cars in tandem, essentially beside the laneway, so that I would have two cars in tandem, and the car in the rear yard would be able to back around the car and out the laneway, and that would maintain that access through to the backyards of those other properties. So I just wanted to propose that because, you know, my client does want to be a good neighbor, is very concerned with that, with being a good neighbor. And so I just wanted to propose that because those are some of the changes that, based on the comments we've seen to date, that when we address technical comments from staff, that's some of the ways that we intend to address some of the comments that have been heard from the public as well. I'm pleased to entertain any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Councillor Neal? Oh, well, I'm sorry, I have to hear from staff.
Through you, public notice was provided in accordance with the Act, and approximately 12 pieces of written correspondence were received, and there were numerous phone calls received by staff providing both clarification and reference material in support of the proposed application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Neal?
Thank you. I appreciate that you've tried to address some of the things that have been expressed already. I guess my concern is with the number of bedrooms that are going in, and I know that we're still at the one parking space per unit, although I understand we are exploring the idea of having it as a ratio of bedrooms, which a lot of communities have done. Is there any way that you could address the concern I think we're all going to hear tonight, which is the issue of appropriate amount of parking for that number of bedrooms? Because clearly this will be, in all likelihood, adults that are living in the units. So that's my initial concern, but I look forward to hearing other concerns as well. Thank you.
Certainly. I mean, I think, you know, through you, Madam Chair, you know, right now the bylaw requires one space per unit. I can tell you that right now the house at 268 is rented by students. There are 7 rooms in that house, and there are 7 tenants of that house. And I believe there are 0 cars. Is that correct? So I can't say for sure, but that's an answer that I can get to you with respect to, you know, how many cars are there, because that might help us to understand that if it was rented by students, what the demand would be. But we would certainly ensure that this complies with the bylaw.
And I know that consideration for reduced parking requirements along those arterials that have express bus service is frequent, but, and I noticed you referenced Williamsville Main Street, which is blocks away from this address. So it's a bit of a stretch to reference that within your rationale. So thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Councillor Osanic?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Will there be enough room for to plant trees as part of the landscape plan?
yes, through you, Madam Chair, there certainly is. And one of the key things that we were designing to is there's 2 mature street trees. There's actually 3. There's a small tree and 2 larger trees. One that was probably an ash that was replaced a few years ago. And we had always intended to maintain the 2 larger trees. We were going to have to move the one smaller one. But if we do realign the driveway as we're suggesting, we would actually retain all 3 existing trees. The trees along the laneway, if there are truly, lots of people using that laneway, we're going to have to clean that up a bit. And I do think some of those will have to be removed or at least trimmed. But there's definitely room to both retain and plant some new as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple quick questions for you, and I have a question for staff as well. So you mentioned with the removal of the garage, the percentage of open landscape open space before removal of the garage was about 24 point something %. With removal of the garage, the percentage on the corner house, the existing house, is now over 30%, which is the new standard, the new bylaw that we passed recently. What about, you didn't mention the lot where the new construction is going. Is it also going to be over 30%?
Yes. So through you, Madam Chair, I actually ran some specific calculations to ensure that the changes that I'm suggesting be made tonight would also exceed 30%. So basically, the existing house, we were extracting the garage and the graveled parking area, and we were around 25%. So with the garage gone, we're over 30%, even with the lot becoming smaller by straightening the line. The new house was at 48% open space. But if we go with the realignment that I'm suggesting, which is basically a long driveway that would go to the rear of the property beside the lane, even with the cutting off of that little corner of the lot, we still exceed 30%, even with adding a shed to deal with bicycle and garbage storage and with dealing with the 2 parking spaces.
Okay, and now my question to staff is sort of related. So the 30% was a new bylaw that was passed. This was all as a result of discussion of another development in the same district, in my district, where it started the conversation about, similar to what's happening in Ottawa, bunkhouses, the proliferation of these large additions on homes. That's not exactly what your proposal is, but the discussion that came out of it about the interim control bylaw was presented to council, and the question I have has to do with the other measures that were proposed as a reaction to that discussion. So staff came back with 6 specific changes, some that were already started and some that would be accelerated and some that were new. And one of those was, as I understand, the 30% minimum landscape open space requirement. And then some of those things were passed and are now in law, and some were appealed. And so my question is there anything in the relief being sought, and I don't know if it's staff or you want to answer this, that is under appeal, and what's the ramification of that?
I could start if you want. I mean, and maybe staff as well, but
Maybe I'll start with Commissioner Hurdle.
Thank you, and through Madam Chair, and others may want to add, but the appeals that are currently in place are related to the official plan update. So all of those policies are contained within the official plan. They wouldn't apply in this case because this is a zoning amendment and not an official plan amendment. So the policies that we're looking at that are appealed are of a different nature. So the 2 that have been approved and that are currently in effect would be the conversion, the removal of the conversion, and the open landscaped area.
So to follow on, is this severance would it have fallen under the old conversion rules that were as of right? Yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair, no, they wouldn't have. So the conversion was the actual conversion of the interior space within an existing building.
The one thing I would add was, in addition to the landscaped open space provision that was added as part of the response to the interim control bylaw, we also added the amenity area requirements. So those standards would apply to this proposal.
Okay, so what is the, maybe you know the answer to this, for the amenity space requirement, how does that stand opposed to, when compared to the new bylaw?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's more than double the requirement.
Is it just questions, or is this is it just questions, or do I?
If you'd like to make a comment, that's
Okay,
fine.
I have a comment. So you heard what about the conversation. It was quite a big conversation, involved many participants and an extra public meeting in Memorial Hall to talk about the interim control bylaw. It was very controversial, and it was a split vote at council. Ultimately, council did not support the interim control bylaw, but we're grateful for the changes that were proposed by staff as an alternative. Some of which, as you heard, were just under appeal and don't apply to this particular application. All I'd like to say is basically, if the perception in my neighborhood, I received 17 direct complaints about this from residents, some of whom are here tonight to speak about it, and it will be important to determine what is reality and what is perception. But the perception is that this kind of density added in this area right beside the school will unbalance the neighborhood, that because of the proximity to the school is very desirable for families who have children of school age. And that demographic, although the student demographic is of course always growing because Queens is always expanding, the demographic of school-age children in my district is exploding right now. There are 7 out of 12 classrooms at my daughter's school, 7 out of 12 classrooms for kindergarten and grade 1 only. So in other words, more than half of my daughter's school is dedicated to only kindergarten and grade 1 classes. That is in Sydenham. So although there are many students living in Sydenham, there are also many families living in Sydenham. And because this is right next to a primary school, that perception, I believe, is valid, that this will unbalance the neighborhood because whether they're students or working professionals, doesn't matter, they're all welcome. But 10 adults living right beside a school, it will have an effect on the children walking to school and walking home from school, and the desirability of the area for families who want their kids to be able to walk to school. And there aren't that many neighborhoods left in Kingston where kids can walk to school safely, and this is one of them. So I'm hoping that you can find a way to please the residents and propose something that they will accept in their neighborhood. Thank you.
May I respond, Madam Chair? Just briefly, because through you, Madam Chair, I deeply respect your comments, and I actually think a semi-detached house is a perfect example of a house that could be bought by new families moving to your neighborhood. The ultimate plan would be to do, if this is approved, that we would do a severance that allows both halves to be sold separately. And as I noted, I require my clients to show every room that could be a bedroom to be a bedroom. But the way that this unit is designed, the basement could just as easily be a rec room and an office, and the loft is a really cool room that could be like a master suite. So I think the design of this house is universal enough. The fact that it's a semi makes it more affordable than a single, and it has the potential to attract families to your neighborhood, particularly as you've noted, because it's right next to a school. So it's a hard balance because I have to show everything that can be a bedroom. So I have to show you the maximum bedrooms that are possible in this house. But the end user is ultimately who will decide how those rooms are used. But I do appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to open this to members of the public. We have a microphone on this side, and there's a microphone just on that side. If you could, when you come forward, name and address, limit 5 minutes, and Mr. Keane will respond in total at the end when all the comments and opinions have been heard, and he will respond as much as he can. And after that, of course, you still have the planner on file to speak to. But tonight is your chance to tell us. If you'd like to come.
Thank you. My name is Meredith McDonald, and I live in Sydenham, and my kids have gone to Winston, and so this had a direct impact on us when we saw the sign go up. Perfect. Hopefully that's better. So why is it that council of the Planning Committee should refuse to accept these bylaw amendment requests? As we heard from the Fotan representative, the area is zoned for low density. Severing this lot and putting in an additional 10 bedrooms to what already has, as he stated, 7 bedrooms, would actually tip this lot itself over to medium density. Infill is important, and the official plan is pointing that out, that some modest infill. To me, 10 bedroom is not modest infill. 10 bedroom in the backyard of a house is a little bit more, and as you can see here, that's a picture of Winston. So this 10 bedroom semi would be butting right up next to my kid's school. From what I read, the lot is not big enough for a single family dwelling. A single family dwelling needs to be on a lot that's over 370 meters squared. This semi-detached would be on a 332 meter squared lot. So you're putting in 2 houses on what isn't large enough for 1. Similar exceptions in the area, as we know, there is renters, and we do need to ensure that there's room for families and for residents. Allow for 2 dwelling units with a maximum number of 9 for 2 units. So 268 right now has 7, and we want to add another 10. So we're doing 17 as opposed to 9 on a similar lot size. As well, we've kind of pointed out that severing this isn't big enough for a single family home. So if it's not big enough for 1, why would we then make it 2? And as of right, converting it from 1 to 2, as you saw from the picture across the street of the previous house, they made it a 2-bedroom or a 2-dwelling unit by attaching fireplace exit between the 2 houses and called it a 2. So this is their way around making it a duplex. I have to say that I don't know if I fully, I'm sure city staff and planners will look at this, but I've been told that minimum open landscape does not include any of the pavement, any of the parking, whether it be gravel or anything. So if you now take away a laneway that the other 4 houses have, and you take away the 2 parking spots for both the retained and the new severed lot, I still don't see how a house this size could actually maintain a yard for a family to raise their kids in and to play in. And as well, there's, to me, serious safety concerns. On the picture on this side, you can see this is where kids walk home. And often some of these kids are as young as 3 when they start school. The driveways go right past here. I have 3 kids myself. I'm not necessarily holding 3 hands at once when I'm walking home. And kids walking in front of these driveways, if there's 10 bedrooms and multiple cars, to me is a safety concern. As well as the privacy. Can I just say no to that? This is actually my daughter's classroom window. So this would be the view that the new bedrooms would have into grade 4. As I was actually in the room, I could watch this current house's TV. And that's on the old lot. So to me, if you have a 10-bedroom place butting right up to the school, safety-wise, kids' identities, that's a concern. Sorry, I get a little emotional. I think taking a harder look at this and actually applying the bylaws that are being enacted to protect and do modest infill is important. I think you guys will be getting a copy of this, so I'm not going to read it because you're all very intelligent people, but I don't believe it meets the minimum required amenity space if you actually divide the house in two. As it was proposed until it changed tonight, it didn't meet green space, open landscaped. There'll definitely be negative impact and privacy by overlook of the building butting right up to the school and the windows. Risks to the students walking to school. The school principal was even concerned with the size and the density that was proposed right next to her school, as well as it, to me, requires a whole new zoning. If you're going from low density to medium density, that's a different proposal than what I'm seeing here. And there's a lot of other small
30
stuff
seconds.
that, yeah, I will let you read tomorrow. But I just want to point out that Kingston is a great place to raise families and a great place to raise kids, and a lot of us like being right downtown where we can walk to Queens to work or to the hospital. And so I really hope that you'll consider turning this down, and hopefully they can come up with a smaller infill proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll have Mr. Keane respond at the end of this portion of the public meeting. Would anyone else like to speak? We have a microphone here. Oh, sir, if you'd like to come to the microphone over here.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Great, thank you. My name is Marcus Taylor. I live sort of diagonally opposite from 268 Victoria Street, and I do appreciate the professionalism of the presentation you've given, but I feel that this is three very compelling reasons to exercise extreme caution about this proposal. The first one, it strikes me that if we're talking about 8 exemptions from bylaws, the word minor disappears away. We're far from minor infill here. We're talking about an extremely high density of housing space in a small lot. The notion that this would be bought by a family, which you've already said, there's 7 students living on a lot at the moment, and that's a good sized lot, but now it's going to be tiny houses next to each other. It stretches belief, so we should put that aside. This will be student rental, and the idea of having 17 students on this relatively small lot goes beyond minor intensification in any practical term for those of us living around it. So this makes me extremely concerned. If we have to ask for 8 exemptions for bylaws, then we may as well say the bylaws don't apply and change them fundamentally at the root so you don't have to. This is not just bending the law, it's giving it a real shove well into another zone. I really feel this is pushing the sense behind the law beyond what it should be sustaining. The second thing is obviously the school, and quite clearly my children as well are in the classrooms right behind here that look upon this site. I cannot imagine the amount of disruption to the school when this construction goes through. It's hard enough keeping kids focused on classes without a building site next door. And then, of course, you have at least 3 windows on the house coming through, which is going to be right up against them. This is unique. There is no other house that close to this school on this entire lot. Nothing. So this is absolutely breaking new ground with this. It should be cause for concern, I think, in that respect alone. Why we need to push up and what kind of precedent this sets strikes me as a little concerning. So I am worried for that thing. But the third reason I think is the most important, because the previous presentation spoke to those earlier issues very eloquently. And the third one is that, beyond the legalities and all the plans, etc., there's something far more important here. And that's the issue of a neighborhood has community, right? And at the moment, this community is in flux. The neighborhood has been changing primarily because these bylaws keep getting shifted, and these kind of dwellings for intense student habitation keep getting built. and the feeling of the ghettoization of this area. Now, there's many families living in this area still, but we do find that this is a mixed area, and we actually enjoy it, having students and families. It creates a good thing, but it takes a lot of work, a lot of work. I have to go and I have to talk to the houses around us, talk to the students, go meet them face to face. Hi, see those windows up there? 9-year-old boy, 11-year-old girl, 6-year-old boy, 5-year-old girl, etc., to make them know. And you have to go this one long. So then when my daughter wakes me up at 11 o'clock on Saturday night and says, Daddy, the men next door are running naked up the street again singing songs, then I have to go over there, deal with the drunk students, say, hey guys, come on, put your clothes on and get in. I'm not joking here. Halloween was another one. And by the way, the students renting the house on 268 at the moment are not particularly cooperative. They're not setting a good example. So this landlord is not doing a great job at the moment of bringing in high-quality tenants. At the homecoming, there was an incident where they did not respond agreeably to being asked to tone down their partying. So, not got a good sense here. So this is it. It takes a lot of work to manage the area. It takes a lot of work for those living here to foster a sense of community. And you put in another 10 students on the top of the 7 there. This breeds the kind of thing that we cannot handle. We haven't got the time, the energy to keep sort of going over and trying to work with them, saying, hey, look, you're part of a residential neighborhood here. Tone it down, guys. You will appreciate the silence when it comes to exam time, etc. It takes a lot of work. You're really going to take the point beyond the threshold when we can do that work. And we want to do that work. We don't want to be driven out. This kind of thing, I'm afraid, is pushing us beyond the limit. It really is making a qualitative change in the neighborhood. And it's something that we can't keep taking on because it's just getting too big. So on that sense of community, of creating a community in which both students and households with family, etc., can both live in the great neighborhood it is, no, this is becoming, ghettoization. We've seen what happens further down, closer to the university. It's starting to creep up. I ask you please to reject this application to maintain the status quo so that those of us that live with families in this area can continue doing the good work of working with the students and having responsible relationships. This is starting to push us over to the edge. So please reject this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like to come to the microphone. Oh, sorry. Could I just get your address? We didn't hear it. 283. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kim Connolly. I live around the corner from this proposed housing development. 18 years ago, my husband and I bought the house in part because of its proximity to Rideau Public School for French Immersion and KGH, as my husband is a neonatologist and needs to have a quick response time to get to the hospital. We have to live in this area. It's not a choice. I am against this building, and I have a couple of reasons, and some of them are actually shared amongst everybody else, but I just want to reiterate what they have said. The first one is there's already a house on this property, and they already have problems managing the tenants that are currently there. Personally, I have made multiple calls to security, to Queen's Security, the Kingston Police, bylaw, and property standards. They can't manage one house on this property. I can't imagine how they're going to manage 3. Second point is adding more student housing is going to increase the student population in an area already densely populated by students. This is pushing families out of the neighborhood. 18 years ago, when we bought our house, there was 1 rental on the street. Today, we have 8 families left out of 23. The families that have left because of the student noise and the litter that is associated with student rentals. My third concern is increasing population in this way creates a segregation of a group of people from the main population. Our goal should be to be diverse populations, not segregated ones. Segregated populations make it hard to enforce the rules if no one is following them. For example, if one neighbor doesn't pick up their garbage, the other neighbor won't pick up their garbage, and so on down the street. If one neighbor parks on the front lawn, which is becoming more and more common because there is not enough parking space, then the other neighbor will park on the front lawn. It goes on and on and on. One person sees someone drinking beer on the street, the other person thinks that this is acceptable, so they do it. So it's like as like. According to an article written by the Urban Land Institute, which is a global organization responsible or providing leadership in the responsible use of land and in creating, sustaining, thriving communities worldwide, they say that an example of a bad density is segregated groups. Segregated groups contribute to ghettoization of neighborhoods. And the benefit of the university town is the increase in diversity. So why are we allowing this segregation? Guelph, I know, has a limit on the number of rentals on any given street to prevent this segregation and a concentration of students on one street. So as you can say, as we now have 8 out of 23, we have an overpopulation of students versus families. My next concern is about the school, and it's the disruptive behavior that the tenants in this particular house have been displaying, and particularly in warm weather, they will have loud music blaring any time of the day. They're swearing, they're having their beer pong games going on at 2 in the afternoon, and I just don't know that that's appropriate behavior to be exhibiting beside a school.
1 minute, please.
And not only the behavior, is the glass on the street that is constant on that street. And allowing this building to go through will effectively ruin any chance of this beautiful house being converted back to a family home. One last thing I just want to say. Perhaps cities with good densities are not necessarily high density or low density, but are ones in which people with a vested interest in the welfare of the urban fabric and urban experience have the opportunity to make or influence decisions. These people also need to be able to make and influence decisions early on and often in the process of designing, developing, and maintaining their cities so that innovative and integrative ideas around good density in cities are taken on board are contextually appropriate.
Thank you. Mr. Dixon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Frank Dixon, 495 Alfred, Apartment 2, K7K 4J4. So I'm opposing the application as it currently is being presented. I think the lot is too small for the new higher density being proposed. Those points have been made before. My next one is new. The planner's slides, as presented tonight, didn't accurately show the latest proposals. So that's confusing and unprofessional, in my view. If it was a high school presentation, you'd be marked down
Mr.
by the teacher.
Dixon, we are trying to speak
Yep.
to the facts
Yep.
of this application, please.
Yep. The landlord's struggles in managing the property, as already pointed out by the neighbors, points to me for a need to license landlords in the city of Kingston going forward. Now, I don't live right there, but I could potentially support severance with one new single house on the lot with 4 to 5 bedrooms. The 10 proposed is too much. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. If you just push the button so the red light comes on. There we go. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Erica Campbell. I live around the corner from the proposal. I'm very against this proposal. I've lived in the neighborhood for about a dozen years now, and I'm really concerned about our neighborhood. I have young kids as well who have gone to Winston, who are now at Vanier and KCVI. Since the dozen years I've lived here, I've seen many, many family homes where families have moved away, whether it's due to noise or garbage or parking on front yards. They've moved away to more family-friendly neighborhoods. And I've seen a lot of conversions where houses, they say, well, they'll still be available for families, but are really truly being converted into student rentals. For example, 76 Center, which we raised our concerns about. There's a recent build on Collingwood I'm concerned about. Another one, a family home being converted to house students on Edge Hill. I'm not against students. I think it's great, the diversity in a community. But we're past that tipping balance now where we have more and more families and retired people who don't want to live in our neighborhood anymore. The ghetto is growing and getting larger and larger, and you know that by the stories of homecoming parties getting further and further away from the core of the university. There's more and more houses now that have 10, 20 students packed in. You walk around the neighborhood and you see more and more yards, front yards, with cars parked on them. Or if you peer into the back, it's a parking lot in the back. They don't have any yard space anymore. So they're not likely to be converted back to a family home. I was very happy and impressed with the work that the city has done with Lanier Hurdle. I went to a meeting just earlier this week to hear about the city's work in trying to help stabilize our neighborhood. And they've done a lot of work, and I applaud them for that. But the current proposal, there's so many reliefs being requested. You spoke about, density comes down to mathematics, and that, rear yard and landscaped yard, it's just a zoning thing. It's not, it's our neighborhood, it's where we live. If you were to go ahead and build that, those houses would not go back to family homes. They have no yard. And then from how close it is to Winston, if you walk by places around the Arc, I'm at the Arc about 5 days a week, picking up and dropping off kids from swim practice. And in a lot of windows, there's big Coors Light posters or other things that, aren't appropriate. But, I kind of say, well, that's Aberdeen, or that's Earl Street right across from the Arc. But this is right beside a school. So who's going to stop the student from putting up some inappropriate poster that the classroom that both my daughters went to, one of them was just last year, so are they going to have their blinds pulled down the whole time so they don't see inappropriate, whether it's a poster, promoting drinking? We know we have a drinking problem with students, and it's been linked to a lot of mental health issues. So why are we sort of letting just our young kids be exposed to that? This really, really concerns me. I think our neighborhood, it's not even at a tipping point now. It's going completely the other way, that the diversity is going down. We're having more and more students move in. And I'm not against students. I have students who live behind me that whenever we pull in, we share a driveway, I talk to them. I know one of their parents. It's great. But when there are so many students, as the previous gentleman said, you can't get to know all these students. And when you do have students who are misbehaving, it's a very contentious relationship. The house that's currently there always has lawn chairs on the roof over the front door. There's no railing. This is not a balcony. So there's already concerns about this house. And now we're going to have a duplex with no yard space and parking issues, and with 10 bedrooms, we're going to have more issues. So we asked the city, we told the city we're very, very concerned about the health and stability of our neighborhood. This just sort of backs up our concern about more and more of these houses being converted to student houses that can't go back to family homes. So I ask you to reject this proposal, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Sorry, could we get your address, please? Sorry. 1 Kensington? Thanks. And if you'd just push the button. Okay. There we go. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Daniel Weisberg, property owner at 250 Victoria Street and 368 Victoria Street. And I just learned tonight that they're going to try to retain the laneway, the right-of-way. And I've sent all these documents to Jason Sands. But basically, I have on my deed, I purchased the property in 2005, and I have on my deed clearly a right-of-way. It's parcel 2. And I'm not going to read it all. I mean, it's getting late already here. But basically, I have it's a separate parcel, and I have a right-of-way on 15 feet. There were a garage, and it's a semi. It burnt down a few years ago because kids were doing drugs or whatever back there. But anyways, we still use the laneway for parking. If there is a dwelling that's going to block it, my unit, along with my neighbor, we will have no parking for the current tenants. I also, besides having it on the deed, when I bought it, I have an affidavit from the previous owner, which was the Bessa Corporation. They owned it since 1990, confirming that the right-of-way was always used and that they have this deeded right-of-way going back to 1988. And obviously, we'll have all this stuff for you guys. And then also, there's a letter from Mr. Mark Weisberg. He's owned 289 Frontenac Street since September 1973, and he confirms that, to the best of his knowledge, that this right-of-way in the back has always been used. There's always been a laneway there. So that's, I guess, one of my main opposition to it is the access to the garages back there.
Thank you. Yes, sir. And the microphone is still on.
Good evening. My name is Eugene Zaremba, and I live at 246 Victoria Street. And I've been there since '92. I've been there for about 25 years. And when I first moved in there, the whole neighborhood was a single-family dwelling neighborhood. And I've seen over the years the incursion of students. Not that I have anything against students, and I think it's almost inevitable that students will move into the area. And it's kind of hard to resist that because of the pressures from the students and the fact that they do have to have a place to live. And over the years, I've seen one family after another leave the area. And every time I saw that, I regretted the fact that it happened. And now I live at 246. I'm a small little oasis surrounded by students. I don't think there is a family within about 5 or 6 houses in either direction of me. And I sort of regret the fact that I'm at the point where eventually I'm going to sell my house. And I know it's going to happen. It's going to turn into a rental property as well. And why is that? It's not because, it's because you're going to try to get whatever you can for your property. And somebody who wants to speculate in rentals can afford to pay more for that than a single family. And so that's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. And people have said this before, and I think they've said it very well. It's just the fact that this particular proposal, I think, just encourages more of the same. All right. I mean, they have to be upfront about this. This is going to be a rental. There's no question about that. You can say that it can be 2 single-family dwellings, but it's not the location for 2 single families. And it's not the kind of property 2 single families would want to have. It's not the location 2 single families would want to have. And so I am opposed to this proposal just because I think it encourages the kind of incursion of student dwellings in a region in an area which should be single-family dwellings. I'd love to see all of Victoria Street go back to where it was. It's never going to happen. But with the proximity of the schools and the location it would be just ideal for single families. So I am opposed to this proposal. I raised a different objection when I wrote to Mr. Sands, but after hearing other people speak, I just wanted to mention the fact that the neighborhood has changed dramatically in the last 25 years, and not to the better. I don't think to the better, but that's the way it is. So I just like to voice my objections to this proposal for a variety of reasons.
Thank you. Yes, sir, if you'd like to come to the microphone.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. My name is J. Andrew Grant. I live at 616 Earl Street here in Kingston. I'd like to thank the speaker for his presentation and for meeting with us tonight. I know there's a number of submissions that were submitted prior to the meeting, and you did a great job, I think, in some ways, trying to summarize those points from the different contributions, and you showed us lots of great photos. One of the points that you, I would say, tried to explain away, talking about a shed or moving the shed here or there. I mean, trying to shoehorn 10 new residents in that tight spot. Really what the submission spoke about were issues around the safety of the young children going back and forth to school and other pedestrians right alongside where the proposed site will be. So that was actually the point that people were trying to make. And myself, in terms of, I appreciated the photos you had. I have some photos myself, and I'm hoping I can submit these in a moment. This is taken less than a month ago, right on the property at 268 Victoria Street. It's broken beer bottles that were there from homecoming for roughly 1 week. And they got ground down. This is about 3.5 days after, I guess, the glass was broken, the beer bottles. So they kind of ground down well. And so myself, I walk past you in the morning and then in the evening. But of course, dozens and dozens of young children walk along the same path. And so some of the respondents have talked about your clients having some trouble reining in the current renters at 268 Victoria Street. And so this took roughly 1 week to get cleaned up. Now, what confidence do we have that with this new addition that your clients will be able to ensure safety of especially children, but other residents in the neighborhood from these things like the broken glass? So that was the point that the other respondents were trying to make. And I have one more photo, and I'm glad one of the other respondents mentioned this. And then this is taken just a few days after homecoming. And this is the house. You can see the notice of today's meeting here. Here's 2 lawn chairs perched up on the top here. And down below, there's a broken table. So those of you who are on Twitter probably saw shortly after homecoming a number of stunts where students were leaping off roofs and ledges onto tables and breaking tables. So this is one of those examples of that, less than 1 month ago. And again, the broken table sat there for a week. And so although it wasn't tripping anyone, young children were walking back and forth. And again, those in the know knew this was from one of those stunts where someone leapt off right here, right down onto the table and broke it. And it's not just homecoming. Those of us who've lived in Kingston for any amount of time know that there's a number of these sorts of parties when classes end in December, when classes end in April, St. Patrick's Day, it goes on and on. So it's not just homecoming. So what confidence do we have that your clients, adding 10 new residents to this tiny spot, will be able to rectify these concerns? I'm going to make a formal submission of this to the chair if she will allow it. And I do have extra photos that I will circulate around the room. Thank you.
Yes, please do send. Yep. And would anyone else like to speak to this application? So I would like to hear from everyone who would like to speak before I ask Mr. Keene to respond. So, seeing no other. Oh, sorry. Please go ahead. And you'll need the microphone on. Just that button? There you go.
Thank you. My name's Robert Wasserman. My wife and my daughter are the applicants. And I want to thank everybody for their commentary today, but I want to speak to one specific issue and that's the repeated concerns of my neighbors relative to the conduct of the current tenants. The reason I hired Frontenac Property Management to run this property, in addition to the other 8 rental properties that I have in this city, is because they are the best property management firm in the city to my knowledge. And specifically, they're supposed to address this type of issue so that you don't have to live with kids living outside of the bounds of proper behavior. So quite outside of everything attendant with the application before you today, you should each have my personal commitment that I'll be speaking with the president of Frontenac Property Management tomorrow, Justin Armitage, and see that those students are spoken with, and see that those students are given the strongest possible message they can within the boundaries of permissible actions by a landlord, to see that they represent themselves appropriately and properly and are better representatives within your community. And to the extent that that has not gone on since these students have taken possession in May, this would be the first I have heard of it. Please accept my personal apologies and that of my family, because it's not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I'm sorry. It would go through the planner after this. Okay, on that note, I will ask Mr. Keane to respond.
Well, again, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the public. And I'm just going to, I have a few slides. Sorry, my screen is frozen here. There you go. Thank you. So I have the zoning tables in my presentation at the end, just so I can speak to some of these things, because one of the points that's been brought up is that this is not a minor application, and I, first of all, will agree with that. This is not a minor application that is before this committee. This is a zoning bylaw amendment. And a zoning bylaw amendment, the test that it has to pass is whether or not it conforms to the official plan. So in looking at the provisions that we are seeking to amend, on the retained lot, we need to amend the lot area, which will actually slightly increase if we proceed with the change that I've discussed tonight in the lot line adjustment. The minimum front yard, that is the existing house. So the existing house is 1.9 meters away from the street. So we are seeking to legalize that setback. And then similarly, you can see where it says abutting street, 4.5 meters. The house is only 1 foot from the property line there, 0.4 meters. And then we were originally proposing to amend the amenity area down to 25%. And just to reassure folks in the room, the amenity areas do not count parking areas. They are true green areas that surround the property. So that is one area that will not require change with the removal of the garage. Now further, you can see there's yard projections that require amendment, and this is because the house has a porch, again, that's very close to the property line. And then so those were the requirements that are required for the retained lot. And you can see that outside of the lot area, the amendments that are required are as a result of the existing form of the house. So with respect to the severed lot, the lot area again requires an amendment. We are proposing to bring the house closer to the street because of the proximity of the existing house at 268, but not to bring it all the way to 0.4 meters, but to like a distance that provides a nice sight line to the front of the house. And also we wanted it set back far enough to protect the large street trees. And then because we want to move the front yard to be a little closer, the building a little closer to the street, that also means we have our projection issue, the same as the existing house, where the deck would come closer and therefore require an amendment. So those are the amendments that are required. It relates to area and front yard on the new house, and the old house, it really is area outside of addressing the existing uses. And I think, one of the biggest challenges that I think this city faces, and I think a lot of the input that we received tonight does relate a lot to property management and enforcement. And I have to be careful as a land use planner, because as a land use planner, I have to base my decisions based on form and not on tenure. And I do believe a semi-detached house is an appropriate form of dwelling at this location, that it has appropriate parking and setbacks. I think there was a point raised about segregated populations, and I think I as a land use planner, I do want to make best efforts in the projects that I work on to propose projects that are suitable for people at various stages of life, whether they're students, families, young professionals, whatever they may be. And so as much as possible, this project is attempting to strike that balance. With respect to issues like parking and front yard parking, those are enforceable matters. And if there are people parking on the front yard in your neighborhood that's not on a driveway, it's on the front walkway to the steps, those are enforceable matters that you should bring to the attention of the city, and they can do something about it. There was a question raised about why I wouldn't show the new proposal tonight. And that's because what I show in a public meeting is what has been put onto the computer system that is before the public. It is what all people have access to. Because many people responded to this application and early, I had the opportunity to speak with my client about how we might address some of the comments that have been raised. And so that's why I present to you the application that was submitted to the city, but I suggest to the public in this room some of the changes that we can make to improve this application. I believe I've addressed the matters, and I think the owner of the property I think has taken the comments to heart as well, and I think you can be assured that he will be speaking to his property manager about those tenant-related matters, and hopefully make your neighborhood a better place. I'm pleased to answer any other questions of the committee.
Thank you. Are there more questions from the committee? Councillor Neal.
Just a couple of quick comments, if I might. My youngest two kids went to Winston. I lived on Traymore Avenue. I represented this area in the 90s. So I'm very familiar with the issues that are at work. And the issues you brought forward are truly important, legitimate issues. And I'm not trying to diminish them at all, but under the Planning Act, the OMB and the city we are supposed to base our decisions on land use planning only, which definitely ties our hands, because you have legitimate concerns that are based on the nature of the tenants, of the occupants in your area. And I now represent Williamsville, which has the same headaches with a large student population in one area. I'm not saying this to diminish the merit of your argument. I'm just suggesting, I almost said when you go to the OMB, but if you go to the OMB, you want to base your arguments on zoning, official plan, planning issues. The the law states that those are supposed to be the only concerns when it comes to, and I know that's frustrating. It's frustrating. For me, it was frustrating when I lived on Traymore Avenue as well. But that's the unfortunate reality of what we're doing here. So, but definitely continue to bring forth arguments that are based on land use planning issues. So, thank you.
Thank you. I do have one question that I didn't think to ask staff. Do we have any regulations about setbacks from a school? I just don't know if it's even in our bylaws.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's not a standard that's expressed in the bylaw. It's not a, between a school and a residential use, there's not a, even a standard practice for separation in the industry.
Thank you. I will just agree with Councillor Neal as the councillor for Portsmouth. It's been a tough year, and I certainly understand the feelings in the room right now. And if there are any other questions, with that, I will then close this public meeting and remind you that Mr. Sands is still available for your comments and questions, to be an intermediary with the owners, and Mr. Keane as well. So this is an open project until the comprehensive report comes, so staff are available for comments and asking about changes until the comprehensive report. Thank you. With that, I will...
I'm sorry, can I, just before you declare us closed, could I ask a quick question of staff?
Okay.
Under our new and improved planning process, when this comes back with a comprehensive report, will there be another public meeting that the public will have an opportunity to speak to the comprehensive report?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. If this this will be coming back once we've implemented the new process, which will be the public will be provided an opportunity to provide oral comments at the time of the presentation of a recommendation.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. And with that, I will close this public meeting. And before I open the next public meeting, I realize Councillor McLaren will be declaring a conflict, so he will be leaving the room.
Should I declare it now? Or
At the business portion. Yeah, thanks. And our second public meeting this evening is a zoning bylaw amendment, 276284 Kingsdale, and Mr. Tao will be presenting. So I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to exit the room, and then we'll get started. Thank you. Okay.
All right, thank
Welcome.
you. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and members of the public. This is a public meeting for a zoning bylaw amendment for 276 and 284 Kingsdale Avenue. The amendment is to facilitate a consent application of the subject property to separate two existing buildings. The property is located on Kingsdale Avenue, north of the Frontenac Mall, between Armstrong Road and Centennial Drive. The subject site is made up of two apartment buildings with a surface parking lot serving those buildings. To the west are a number of similar structures, and to the north, a low-density residential neighborhood. To the south, a CN spur line in the Frontenac Mall. To the west, there's a vacant parcel before Centennial Drive. A very large lot, just over 12,000 square meters, 115 meters of frontage. There's 2 existing apartment buildings. They've both been there since about 1990. It's 117 units combined between the two, a mix of mostly 2 bedrooms. The application is being filed essentially because of the requirements of the city's water bylaw. There's 2 existing water services to the 2 buildings. They were installed at the time when the buildings were constructed. The city's water bylaw doesn't allow for 2 water connections to the lot. So we have to sever the property as part of a condo application that's been filed as well. So the rezoning is simply to allow the lot to be severed, recognizing existing conditions that don't comply with the current bylaw requirements. So other applications that have been filed include a consent application to sever the lot, which triggered the rezoning, also a site plan amendment application to update the site plan to facilitate the condo application, which has been filed to convert the current rental units into condominium units. I should mention that the owners of the site are the Kinsman Club of Kingston, so they provide a number of affordable housing units in the city. All of these would kind of fall under that umbrella, as well as a number of other units throughout the city. The intention here is to convert the rental units into affordable home ownership options, whereby the Kinsmen provide a second mortgage that's forgivable to potential homeowners to buy these condos and give them an opportunity to own a home that they probably otherwise wouldn't be able to under normal conditions or normal market requirements. So that's what kickstarted all of this, and it's kind of spiraled into having to do this consent and zoning bylaw amendment to satisfy the water bylaw. So the application will just seek relief from certain provisions of the bylaw, again, as existing conditions created by the consent. So the conceptual site plan, which is probably a little hard to read, essentially, as you saw in the air photo, there's 2 buildings, one on the east side, one on the west side, a large parking lot in between, and then large green spaces around the building. It's designated residential in the official plan, not proposed to change. Based on the official plan policies, the rezoning satisfies the relevant tests, again, maintaining exactly what's there in terms of the uses and the density, et cetera. The zoning bylaw, it's a bit of an interesting situation in terms of the existing zoning of the area. So this whole block north of the Frontenac Mall and south of Kingsdale is all zoned R4-10. The zoning is written in such a way that it's a combined zoning, so all those properties combined can only have a certain number of units, for example. So it means separating this site out into its own site-specific R4-12 or 15 zone, for example, and putting it its own zone to address the site-specific provisions of the lot. So what's being amended or addressed through the zoning bylaw amendment, recognizing existing conditions, is landscaped open space, 40%. The Kingston Township bylaw required 45%. Play space, implementing new standards for play space, essentially 0 required in this space, at least programs play space. Lot area, reducing it from 16,000 to 12,000, recognizing what's existing, and then also recognizing a minor reduction in the west interior side yard, and then parking reduction from 1.25 per unit to 1.22. So in our opinion, given the existing nature of the use, we believe the relief requested is appropriate, and ask that the Planning Committee recommend approval when the time comes, which happens to be later tonight. So thank you. If you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you. And could I hear from staff, please?
Certainly. Through you, the application was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. That included circulation to 95 property owners within the 120-meter radius. On-site signage was posted, and also a courtesy ad was placed in the WIG standard. Thank you. Oh, sorry. To date, there's been no public correspondence received in form of written and/or telephone inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Planning Committee doesn't see very many, if any, of these type of applications, but one of the tenants at Kingsdale right now contacted me for a question for tonight, and I don't know if that's something that we can answer if it's specific. So right now he's renting. They don't want to get that second mortgage. They don't want to buy one of the condo units. So their concern is how long will they have to vacate? So we're going to be assuming that this will go through and you'll get the conversion. What sort of notice under the Planning Act or whatever act governs this gives the tenants notice to then vacate and enough time to find a new place to live?
No, it's a good question. Not strictly related to the zoning bylaw amendment, but obviously a question of concern to the residents. I know the Kinsman, one of the founders of the Kinsman Club, actually lives in the building as well, so I know he's able to communicate with those residents. So there is a requirement, or a number of requirements under the Condominium Act to give notice or to deal with situations where you're converting. So the intention of the Kinsman is to convert these units kind of in a phased manner because they're upgrading them as units become vacant. So the exact timeline that residents would have would probably vary depending on where the unit is at in terms of its renovation. But I think the intention is that the Kinsman, even when the units are converted, the Kinsman could continue to rent those units out as the owners and not necessarily sell them. So it's a good question. I don't have the exact timeline, but there certainly is a well-established set of protections and rules in place to identify when, and the applicants would, or the owners would have to provide notice to all the tenants in advance of all those, in advance of the conversion taking place. So we're working with the applicants and their law firm in terms of providing those timelines and notices.
Thank you. So the owners would give the notice to the tenants officially once this gets approved?
Yeah, so yes.
Councillor Neal?
Yes, I'm happy to hear there was no correspondence. It frees me up to vote tonight since the recommendation is coming up. And these may not be, after my comments in the last, these may not be specific to the planning, but I'm just curious, are they, is it going to be mixed affordable, or is the hope from the Kinsman that the whole unit would become affordable? And is it anticipated that some assistance from our city housing affordable home ownership policy or plan might be sought?
I'll try to answer as best I can. Pete Butler from the Kinsman's here tonight as well, so he may be able to answer better, but the Kinsmen have a long history of providing affordable housing in Kingston, and this is their first home ownership foray, and they intend to do it again. So after this building is converted and sold, they intend to take the proceeds from the sale and do another building and offer it as a home ownership option again as well. So there's no, essentially the second mortgage that's going to be offered, the forgivable second mortgage is going to be offered, is there for anybody who qualifies for it. They can't prohibit somebody from buying the condo. If somebody wants to buy a condo and they don't need the second mortgage, they don't qualify for it, then they can choose to live there. But the Kinsmen are anticipating that it's going to be, it wouldn't necessarily make sense for those people. So the hope of the Kinsmen is that will be entirely taken up by those who can take advantage of that second mortgage. And to my knowledge, no assistance from the city's housing program is required as part of this or being sought as part of this. So, yeah.
Thank you. The Kinsmen, I believe it's on Right Crescent in my district. There's the wonderful seniors affordable housing that the Kinsmen have done, and I appreciate the affordable housing they've built in the city. That's great.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I would like to open this to members of the public. If there's anyone who wishes to comment on this application? Mr. Dixon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to Mr. Tao for the presentation. Just have one question. In the presentation by staff, they said that they notified property owners within a certain distance of the complex. But I'm wondering, is there any requirement for the city and or the planners or the owners to notify prior to tonight's meeting in a formal manner the renters who are actually in the complex now? Because their status is about to change if this were to be approved, right? I'm not sure if there's any law that requires that, but it would seem to be, maybe just being a good neighbor or a good owner or a good renter to do that. So I'm just curious, were the people who live there notified of tonight's meeting in advance? Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to? Well, I'll just wait till we've heard from everyone before we get staff to respond. So yes, please come forward. Yep, you're on. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Christine Watson. I do live at 276. We were not notified. What we got was the sign outside. Oops, the sign outside. So, and nothing's been told to us. We don't know what's going on. So it's hard to know if we're going to be living there or if we're not. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll ask you to respond, Mr. Tao.
So I'll let staff speak to the notification period, or the notification list, I guess. So just to be clear, and I think there's some confusion tonight, this is purely for the zoning bylaw amendment to enable the severance. Has nothing, it doesn't impact or doesn't have anything or bearing, I guess, on the plan of condominium that's forthcoming. So this is purely just to adjust the zoning to allow the lot to be severed so that it complies with the water bylaw. That is needed to eventually get to the plan of condominium, but what's before the committee tonight is only zoning, nothing to do with conversion of tenure. So that's just to clarify on that point. And yeah, to thank you for coming out tonight. I know Ron Anglin and Pete Butler's right there as well, so certainly they're here to answer questions that you may have. And I think that's, the Kinsmen are certainly open to talking to anybody who has questions about upcoming changes in the building. So.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd just like to point to Exhibit F of the staff report, and that is the one that outlines where and which and who received the public notice. It does identify the parcels known municipally as 276 and 284 Kingsdale Avenue, the subject properties, as being notified, and they are provided notification under the Act. Because they are an apartment building, it is not circulated to every individual renter of the unit through the municipal process under the requirements of the Act. They are provided to the whole of the parcel. So it could very well have been such, the posting was posted in the lobby. I'm not sure how and which that was done on site. But that's the requirement under the Act, and that is the way in which the city provided public notification for this application. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Neal.
Yes, just very quickly, I think it would be very good if the Kinsmen, if the owners could arrange a meeting with the tenants to discuss the ramifications of this, because, you know, quite frankly, anything that may make us feel at risk for losing our home is a very upsetting thing. And so I sincerely hope that the kinsmen can arrange to allay some of the fears that people might have, because the reality is, I mean, we get these notifications and they're written in planning language and the ramifications of them aren't really there. So I trust that that can happen. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, and what we're talking about is splitting a lot in half at this meeting. It has nothing to do with the conversion. So it's a step, but I agree with Councillor Neal very much. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I will close this second public meeting. Thank you. And Mr. McLaren can return. Oh, no, he doesn't really have to. We can open it. We've got a quorum. It's okay. Because the first item of business is this one. So I will open the regular planning meeting and call the meeting to order and ask for approval of the agenda. Councillor Holland, seconded by Councillor Osanek. All those in favor? Confirmation of the minutes. November 2nd? Okay. Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Osanek. All those in favor? That's carried. And disclosure of pecuniary interest. Yes.
Hi, I, Jeff McLaren of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, declare my pecuniary interest in the matter of 276-289 Kingsdale Avenue, and that I own property within 2 blocks of those buildings.
Thank you. And with that, Councillor McLaren will leave again. We have no delegations or briefings. We do have our first business item, which is the Kinsman Club application for zoning bylaw amendment. And we have a recommendation on the floor. Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Holland. Comments, questions, all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. And Mr. McLaren can return. Thank you. Our next item of business is 102, 104 Park Street, zoning bylaw amendment. And this is the one that I had a comment for staff on page 15 that I sent to Ms. Agnew, but I'm not sure. I didn't send it to you. No, it was an error in the language. It talked about 4784. Okay, page 61, second full paragraph at the very end. It says, the installation of on-site underground stormwater infrastructure may assist in elevating at least some of the runoff from the rear of the properties. And I'm presuming what staff meant to say was alleviating. That it may assist in alleviating at least some of the runoff from the rear of the properties. It was a little one.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that would be correct. I apologize for the error.
Okay, great, thank you. I know that the public meeting, that was a major concern of people. So, okay, well, with that, we do have a recommendation from staff. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor McLaren. Comments? Questions? Okay, I will call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? Thank you. So that's one opposed. Thank you. And item C, 194 Mack Street, and zoning bylaw amendment. And there is again a recommendation from staff. Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor McLaren. Yes, Councillor Osanek.
Thanks, Madam Chair. There was one letter in our package, and that was about bicycle parking and storage. So would that be dealt with at site plan?
Ms. Diedrichsen?
Through you, Madam Chair, the applicants did revise the proposal to include bicycle storage outside, so there will be readily accessible bicycle storage that's not just within the units.
Okay, great. And with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Or did you have a question? Yes. All those in favor? Thank you, and that's carried. We have no motions, notices of motions, other correspondence, and we certainly did get a lot of correspondence. And we had some addendums as well tonight. Date of the next meeting, way at the bottom, December the 7th. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Neal. Councillor Holland. All those in favor? Thank you.